context, my name is Sherry Wagner-Henry, and I'm the director of the Bowles Center for Arts Administration, which is an MBA degree program here in the Wisconsin School of Business on campus. And why am I up here? What does this have to do with the National Academies of Sciences? Back in May, in fact, May 25th and 26th, there was a think tank in Washington, D.C. that convened a number of universities that are member universities of the Alliance for Arts and Research Universities. We'll talk more about that organization in a minute, along with the National Academies. That was a presentation, an initial presentation of a white paper that you all have hopefully seen and read through and that we'll be talking about today, Branches of the Same Tree. And during that think tank, conversation ensued about, okay, now we know that, once again, we've proven that the arts and humanities are important to teaching and having an interdisciplinary role with sciences, engineering, and medicine. But what next? How do we make that work? And particularly, how do we make that happen and relevant in higher education? A hand was raised and someone suggested, well, maybe we could start by going out to college campuses across the United States and talking about that relevance and helping people on those campuses understand what steps they could take to make that happen if they weren't already. And if you've been at UW-Madison for some time, you know it is happening already. So we're very excited to be one of the first campuses hosting this conversation, which will continue throughout the rest of the year, and hopefully will evolve as we move forward. So a few people that I'd love to call out real quickly before we get started with our presenters. The hosts of today's convening are the Division of the Arts here on the UW-Madison campus, Director John Baldacchino, who's in the room, and Assistant Director Kate Hewson, who have coordinated this particular event. As well, I'd like to recognize Mary Rose Flanagan and Amy Tackett, who are with the Alliance for Arts and Research Universities, which is based at the University of Michigan. Finally, I'd like to introduce Wes Marner, who's the program manager with Discovery Outreach here in the Discovery Building on the Mortgage Institute, just to give us a few words and welcome. Wes.
So I am with Discovery Outreach, which is the programming group here in the building. I'm a member of Laura Eiser's group. I'm sure many of you here know Laura. She's actually in Philadelphia this week and couldn't join me today. For those of you that aren't completely familiar with the setup or organizations here, there's actually three groups that are here in the building. One is WARF, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, which operates the public spaces in this building. So these beautiful meeting spaces that we're in on this main level are operated by WARF. I'm an employee of the Mortgage Institute for Research, which is a private research institute that's affiliated with the university here in the building. And then, of course, there's the University of Wisconsin through the WID, the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery, here in the building. So the three of us, the three organizations here, we work together to cooperatively put on a lot of the public programming that no doubt a lot of people here in the building have seen. A lot of it is science programming, and we do our best where we can to try to do some of that integration of science programming with the arts and humanities. We have a program, probably the best of those is Sound Waves, which some folks here are probably familiar with. The next one's on November 30th, so I'll put in a plug there. Where we do some science lectures and then we combine it with a musical performance to look at whatever that topic is through a musical lens. And then we do science communicator training. There are a number of programs here in the building, particularly a group of programs called Illuminating Discovery that we do in conjunction with WID, where we work with faculty members and students, undergraduates, graduate students, and postdocs to help them hone their craft of communicating their science. And certainly doing that through a creative lens can be an excellent way to connect with the public, connect with students with the science that they're doing. And then finally, the last thing that I'll talk about our group is we are the organizing group for the Wisconsin Science Festival, which is a statewide activity that happens every fall. We wrapped up at the beginning of October this year and had almost 100 communities around the state participate. It's a grassroots effort. It involves a number of organizations of many different types, from schools, libraries, museums, galleries, and everything in between. That includes a lot of humanities, arts type performances, a lot of science activities too. We're pleased to be a convener of that. So if any of you have interest in any of those things or would like to learn more, I'd be happy to give you more information. I'm looking forward to participating as much as I can in your program today, and thank you for coming here.
Yeah. Really quickly, let's go through the agenda for the day, and then we'll get started with our first presenter. We're going to start with the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, who will talk about the white paper. That presentation will probably run somewhere in the 30 to 40-minute range, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. We'll take a quick break after that, and when we come back, we will do what's called Ignite presentations. These are 5-minute presentations that will be sponsored by folks who are doing this kind of work on our campus currently. Each of these groups will have 5 to 7 minutes to present. And then what we'll do is each of those groups will be stationed at the 3 group tables that are in the back. For any of you who want to learn more about their work or want to talk about ways that your work may contribute to what they're doing, we invite you to join them at those tables, where we'll do about a 45-minute working group session. At the end, we'll do a report out and next steps on where we'd like to take this in the future.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here and have the opportunity to talk about this report that was 2 years in the making, and thinking about next steps and how this report can influence how we think about higher education. And so our goal right now in this next phase of work is to think about the implementation of the report findings and recommendations. And so one of the ways that we like to do this is to explore the kinds of scenarios that faculty members sometimes find themselves in, thinking about higher ed and standing up for programs. So one of the greatest things about being a faculty member is that you're almost going to have to wear a suit. Thanksgiving's coming up. There's a lot I got to get off my plate. Better get a to-do list going here. All right. Got to submit that grant. Seems like it never ends. Got to submit the publication to Science or Nature. What else? Yes, come in.
Dr. Bear!
Is that Maria Dahlberg?
Hi, how's it going?
Oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in forever. What has it been, 5 years since you graduated?
A few more than 5.
Come on into my office. Come on in. Have a seat.
Oh,
It's a mess. Just move that stuff.
this is looking the same as it always has.
I know. You know,
Never get used to these roller coasters.
I know. It's so great to see you. What brings you to campus?
Well, actually, the graduate school asked me to come and give one of those career panels. They asked me to talk about how I turned my PhD and how bumblebees got their stripes into the next disruption in personalized medicine.
That's great. You pursued one of those alternative careers.
I'm pretty sure we just call them careers. I mean, founding your own company is pretty satisfying.
Yeah, you're right. You just have to understand, Maria. You know, in my day, people, when they got PhDs, they tended to stay within the story.
I know that you know how the statistics work these days.
I know. No disrespect. That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. You know, speaking of alternative careers. My recent PhD grad, Sandra, she was interested in working with you. I think I wrote her a letter of recommendation maybe a year and a half now. Did that ever work out?
Yeah, Sandra, I remember her. We brought her on. She's on one of our lines. She's great. Follows protocols to a T. Is really reproducible. Yeah, she's.
Oh yeah, the technical skill that Sandra, no one could do a qPCR essay like she could.
Yeah,
I can see that. I'm getting a sense that maybe you're not saying something that you're thinking.
You could always read me. Yeah, I was, and no offense to you, kind of expecting a little bit more coming from your lab. I mean, you always encourage sort of more exploration, and she doesn't have the communication or the teamwork that I was really expecting coming from your
Maria,
lab.
you have to understand. I mean, I know you understand this. You did a PhD. It's a very individual pursuit.
Yes, but
I mean, it's very independent.
I mean, she's sort of the line managers. They tell me that she just sits on her bench in her corner doing her own thing. They ask her for, a summary of her data. She gives reams of just raw results. There's no aesthetic to her communication.
Maria, not everyone has to be able to give a TED Talk like you.
I am not expecting a TED Talk. I'm expecting clean PowerPoint slides. Remember when I was having trouble in my TAing during grad school, and you told me
Yeah,
to
I
take
do.
that improv course with comedy sports.
Oh yeah, that really helped me when I was learning to lecture. I really benefited from improv. It
Exactly.
helped me think about how to be adaptable and empathetic with my audience.
Right. It was really great. It encourages you to sort of get out of your shell, to engage with the students, right?
Are you saying Sandra needs an improv class?
Yeah, probably. But she needs more, right? It's not just the course that you taught, the summer course on biology of aliens.
Oh, those aliens movies. Those are classics with the aliens bursting out of your chest and Sigourney Weaver running through the spaceship. The movies did go kind of downhill, but it was a great way to teach students about biology in the context of film. I mean, those aliens are really based on parasitoid wasps. So we could learn about the biology, we could learn about the film in the context of one class. I actually think a lot of students pursued biology because of that class, and probably some of them pursued film.
You're making my point for me. We need more of that.
More biology of aliens courses?
Well, okay, maybe not more of that exactly, but more learning from other disciplines, cross-disciplinary course integrate. We need more film and arts and humanity and ethics.
Oh, okay. Let me stop you right there. We understand in the sciences the importance of the ethics. We have an online module. We teach students about the importance of plagiarism, responsible conduct of research, falsification, fabrication of data. The important stuff.
Yeah, And if it actually worked, Sandra wouldn't have put forward her proposal last week at the all-staff meeting. You have to take into some consideration personalization and the medicine that I'm actually putting forward these days. Privatization considerations?
Yeah, all right. I hear you. There's something in the news every day about privacy. It's Facebook, Google+.
Yeah, nobody uses Google+ anymore.
Well, excuse me, Maria, but okay. But so, what do you say? What are we supposed to do?
So the other day I was on Twitter. There's good Twitter and bad Twitter, I'll admit. But I was following David Skorton. You know David Skorton?
Oh yeah, wasn't he the president of Cornell?
Yes, and now he's the secretary of Smithsonian, one of those alternative careers.
Fair enough.
He chaired a National Academy of Science study.
Oh, the National Academies. They're the premier organization for offering scientific advice. My advisor was a National Academy of Sciences member. It's a real honor.
Yeah, so they actually looked into these courses, like your Bio of Aliens course, to see how the learning outcomes are affected for the students. And they found that there's, better communication skills, better teamwork skills, better empathy, the things that employers like me are actually looking for. I happen to have a copy. It's called Branches from the Same Tree.
Branches from the Same Tree? That's a strange title.
It's like the Einstein quote.
Oh yeah, it's right here.
Yeah.
All religions, arts, and sciences are branches from the same tree.
Yeah.
Very poetic.
So they actually go through, they do an examination of how different courses like this can help develop these skills.
Maria, no disrespect to you or to the National Academies. Like, Lord knows I have the utmost respect. But you've been out of academia for a while, and I don't think you appreciate that this is very hard to do in practice.
Okay.
And not to mention the fact that, I'm the Simon A. Bairbach Distinguished Professor in Biology. I know biology. I have a responsibility to students to give them, the real depth in that, knowledge base. And it's very important. This other stuff is nice to have, but it's not a need to have.
Yeah, but it's not enough. We need more. The employers like me are looking for more than just the best qPCR.
Okay, even if you're right, how would we even stand this up? There's so many institutional barriers. Think about it. Okay, I don't even know anyone in the history of the arts department. The biology of aliens course, that was just luck that I happened to have a friend who was in the film department and we were able to team teach a course and we had the resources. It costs a lot of money to team teach a course. We have to think about our accreditation requirements. We have to think about the budgetary model. What about tenure and promotion? If my grad students are teaching interdisciplinary courses, how are they going to get a job after they graduate?
I will hire them. All of these are very legitimate concerns. The report actually goes through them, talks about them, details out what different institutions are doing to actually overcome and surmount them. there are examples, actually, in the report, as well as online. There's a compendium of over 200 possibilities that you could go through and see if any of them are adaptable here at the university.
But how would I get buy-in from the top? I mean,
So, did you catch the Purdue game this weekend?
oh, that was such an exciting game.
It was great, wasn't it?
Triple overtime or
I
something.
know, it was amazing.
So crazy.
So I was there.
Go Badgers!
Go Big Red. I was there, and the
Purdue?
study, yeah, it was great. It was amazing. You should have been there in person. It was a fantastic
okay.
game. The study director, Ashley, I think you would get along with her. She's fashion. She was at Purdue giving a presentation, part of this, they're calling it like a road trip, to go through this report and detail out what possible outcomes are. She's doing it across all of the Big Ten schools.
But
And
she hasn't come
actually-
here yet?
Not that I know of, I haven't heard anything. David Saylor gave a list of all the different schools that were out there. And they're going through, seeing what is on campus, what's available, what different schools and courses are already possible, and actually how to scale them, how to develop them further.
Well, we definitely don't want to get left behind if our other Big Ten schools are doing this. But so
Exactly.
what would the next step be?
So maybe I could put you in contact with Ashley, we could set up a call, maybe set up a meeting with leadership.
I guess it's worth a conversation.
All right, I'll put my scheduler on it.
You're so fancy, Maria.
Yeah, what can I
Thank
say?
And scene. So we just wanted to do something a little different in the spirit of the report. And thank you so much to Maria Dahlberg for being my partner in crime for this. I have some slides that go through the key messages from the report, but I thought maybe we could start by just kind of having a conversation about what you all heard from that little skit, because I think a lot of the key messages are captured there. So does anybody want to throw anything out that they heard? Yes?
Aren't we just talking about a basic liberal arts education at the undergraduate level?
A very good question. So it's related, but I think the difference between what we're talking about here is that, so the way we often think of a liberal arts education is that students are taking, like a philosophy course over here and a chemistry course over there. But then these example programs, they're much more intentionally integrating like the philosophy in the context of the chemistry course. But it does connect to this sort of historic notion of a liberal education that is a foundation of all American higher education. So it's sort of, there's a complicated history that actually we describe in a lot of detail in chapter 1. But it's a little different than just sort of like what you might think of as a standard general education curriculum, which we do see at almost every institution of higher ed, which
Well,
is
maybe it's,
interesting.
I went to a small private liberal arts college where, although there wasn't intentional cross-pollination between departments, perhaps it was the nature of the residential college where that happened very much.
Exactly, absolutely. And like living, learning communities and liberal arts schools, many of them are doing this just sort of very naturally. Other key messages you heard from the, over here, yes?
Most careers today are what you call alternative careers because the traditional ones don't exist anymore.
Right. So Maria and I, we work for the Board on Higher Education and Workforce at the National Academies, and we know that while an academic career is a very fulfilling one, we know statistically speaking there are fewer jobs in academia than there used to be, and there are many more PhD students, so it's just impossible to fill all of those jobs. So many people are pursuing other careers, so that's sort of a backdrop for this. Other takeaways from the skit? Yes?
It's insufficient to be technically excellent. You need to have those interpersonal skills and creativity and flexibility to be able to be successful in a very dynamic environment now.
Yes, that was one of the most striking messages from the report, was that when we looked at, it was really fascinating, when we looked at survey after survey of employers, we saw the same message, which is that, sure, if you're going to be an engineer, you need some of the technical skills, but that's not what's really missing. That's not what employers are telling us are missing when they have graduates coming into the workforce. What's really missing is this ability to have these cross-cutting skills like communication skills and teamwork and ethical reasoning and critical thinking, and those were the same kinds of outcomes that we found associated with these sort of more integrative courses and programs. Other takeaways? Yes? No? Yes?
I just want to make sure that the direction is not taken on one side, because I come from the arts, so to speak, in the same way, the other way around. So don't imagine that the arts people go out there and do all these alternative things easily. So I mean, we're having a problem. For example, we know from alumni in the arts who say we had a very great experience in our courses, but how are we going to connect with the real world, with business? How are we going to connect with engineering? So I mean, the direction doesn't come from one side only. So I mean, I think that's important to start with. Otherwise, we'll get this notion that the arts are somehow this miracle or cure or great instrument to achieve things, which I have problems with.
Agreed, and I apologize. I'm glad you raised that. The report does take a very balanced view of this. So the scope of the study was not just to think about science education, but it was to think about how integrating the arts, humanities, sciences, engineering, medicine are mutually reinforcing. It's easier for us to present this on the science side just because we are scientists, but so we should get our arts colleagues to do a different version of this skit or another one to illustrate that point.
We have the same conversation.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yes?
One of the tough things for me too is I come from research and just my experience as an undergrad and grad student is that scientists often need only to be good communicators to other scientists all the time. So it's kind of difficult to like incentivize or tell people that it's important, especially even if you're only going to academia or if you are, to still be a good science communicator for the public. I think that's like one of the things that I'm trying to understand how to persuade people to do.
Right. That's a great point. Yes, in the back.
In my classes in computer science, I always play the 2005 speech by Steve Jobs, the commencement address at Stanford, in which he talked about how when he was a recent dropout at Reed, he wandered around and found a class on calligraphy in the arts department. And this inspired him, again, he was a drop-in, he was not paid for it, but people were trying to let him stick around and all that. And I'm just projecting for a minute, though, what would be possible if you allowed the students to explore. Just giving them, an assigned class, the arts and society that they have to take is not the same as allowing them to explore among various options and again, show their own creativity with their own free time. So it's a great speech. Please, online, Steve Jobs, Stanford, commencement. It's worth your time to listen to the whole thing.
A great point. Thank you. Other comments? Yes?
Yeah, I also think it's important to remember that institutions value the research component. So for those who choose not to remain in academia, they're perceived as less scientific or so that, you need to change the academy itself in terms of how it views itself and its PhD students.
Absolutely. And I will say, we have a number of reports coming out of our group at the National Academies that all get at this same point, because that's a very important consideration. The culture and how what we value and how we communicate about that. And I feel optimistic that the tide's turning on that, but maybe that's because now I'm standing outside of academia looking in, but it's a very good point. Yes, sorry, I didn't see you there.
I think another important point to make is that there are a lot of graduate students, both master's and PhD students, who would love the opportunity to take these types of courses, but they're not allowed to based off their advisor. So if this could be implemented at the departmental level and the program level as a requirement to have these multidisciplinary courses, then students could go ahead and do this.
Right.
So they're often not allowed to take these courses, and then it automatically, it ultimately hurts them in the end.
Right, so this is like sort of an institutional barrier that we could try to adjust. And it reminds me to make one point, and that is that, the National Academies, all of our reports are evidence-based reports. So we take a hard look at what is the state of knowledge on a particular topic. And one thing that we learned, and this will probably come as a surprise to no one here, but there are actually a lot of things we do in higher education that we assume we do because there's some evidence base to suggest they benefit students, and in fact there is none. We've just been doing it. I mean, a really interesting example is the, I think it's like the pre-med exams. you think like questions asked on those exams, they must be based in, you know, what doctors need to know. There must be some sort of evidence base for that. But actually, if you look historically, like some person just decided like this is what we should ask students. And that doesn't mean it's wrong. But I think we also have to think about, you know, if the students in the graduate school are being required to take, you know, these 5 courses, and so there's no room in their schedule for them to take another course. Are those 5 courses actually the 5 courses they should be taking? Do we have any reason to believe that they are? And maybe we do, but it's still worth having that conversation, because it's not always the case that we know for sure that those courses or programs are benefiting the students. Other comments, questions? Yes?
That really spoke to the, you know, it would be nice to have integrated learning opportunities around things like empathy in medicine, or but not necessary to have, you know. So examining the question you just asked is a nice complement to the other. You know, what aren't we making time for? That
Right. Yeah, and I will say in the report we see medicine's actually one of the leaders in this. We looked across medical schools, and I think the majority of medical schools actually have humanities and medicine programs. They're not all required. Some of them are offered as electives, but they're very common. So that's so it's interesting to see medicine kind of taking the lead. We see medicine and engineering kind of leading in these kinds of approaches, and we've speculated, we don't know for sure, but we've speculated perhaps it's because both medicine and engineering are professional degrees, and there's this, you know, really direct connection to people and serving people, and so maybe that's why there are these conversations happening in those fields. Yes?
So one thing I noticed is that there's a person working in, you know, leading a company who comes in to say to a faculty member, you know, really we need more students who can do X, Y, and Z. And something I think we often hear, at least at an R1 university like ours, is, well, we are not a vocational school. We do not develop curriculum that's just because the career people tell us that this is what students need to have in order to be successful, or that this is what the employers are looking for. We're not a trade school.
Right.
And I really, as a person who often finds myself in those conversations, I really struggle to find the right words to combat that perception.
I'm so glad you raised that point. I think, for me anyway, I think one of the most interesting takeaways also in our exploration of the sort of the backdrop of this report, sort of like what is the situation in higher education today, was we've heard the same thing. Like, what's the purpose of higher education? Is it to prepare students for employment? You know, you hear these surveys, these Gallup-produced surveys, students are saying, we see higher education as a path to a good job. Is that really the purpose of higher education? Others are saying, no, higher education is not about getting a good job. It's about preparing people to live their lives and be engaged citizens in a democracy. And what we found, interestingly enough, is that actually I don't think what employers are asking for is all that inconsistent with what higher ed is also saying they want students to leave having, you know, mastered. So
I sometimes think, not to interrupt, but I sometimes think that a lot of the pushback that you modeled are excuses. I think it comes down to not an excuse like, I don't really want to do this, so I'm just going to throw an excuse at you, but maybe an I don't know how.
Right.
Or, you know, kind of getting back to her to-do list. I just have there's so many institutional barriers that push back against this happening, and the barriers exist for just sort of path dependency reasons. Someone created them, and that's just how it's been done.
Right.
It hasn't been examined, but the prospect for someone who's an extremely busy professional in her own right, trying to take the time somehow and find the right people and assemble the evidence to combat those is just overwhelming.
Absolutely.
So it's easier to throw an excuse of, well, we're not a trade school, or, well, I don't know anyone on the other part of campus.
Right, absolutely. No, and the barriers are real. I mean, we tried to make a point that Maria's character said, like, these are legitimate concerns, and obviously a lot is asked of faculty. But yeah, I was just struck that there's a survey done by the American Association of Colleges and Universities looking across their member institutions, like a lot of schools, And there's this incredible convergence across these schools in terms of what they say are the learning outcomes they want all students to leave higher ed having in possession of. And they are the same sort of critical thinking, teamwork, empathy, a global understanding, these sort of cross-cutting skills that are exactly what the employers are saying. So maybe we just have to think about how to change the conversation, while also acknowledging that there's a lot asked of faculty in higher ed and there are structures in place, and it's not at all trivial to rethink how we're approaching higher ed. Other comments and thoughts? Yes.
I was going to ask, maybe this fits, maybe it doesn't. I work with a lot of students, and with a lot of them, I encourage them to do things like sort of outside their, I want to say their career path in terms of arts, humanities, community service, community engagement, those sorts of things. And some of the reasons that they don't want to get involved in that is because they sort of see it as like soft science-y stuff that isn't really going to get them anywhere. But the overlying trend from them is also that people don't seem to have a lot of interest in funding things that don't have like solid, objective, concrete outcomes. There's the idea that while arts are, well, I come from sociology, and there's the idea that, while sociology is very interesting and you could spend your whole life doing it, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? How are you going to make any money with it? How are you going to do this with it, do that with it? So I think the goal-orientedness often gets in the way of like what the bigger mission is, of like educating people who can think, and then also who have that worldview of seeing how other people live.
Right, absolutely. And that sort of gets at, to the extent that we do need to do more research on effective practices in higher ed, and I think we do, we have to be thinking about, start with the outcomes that we're going for and work back from there and build our evaluation systems around that. Because, I think if you can show that what students are getting are these really, they're mastering these sorts of cross-cutting skills that are really pertinent in almost any career pursuit, then it's easier case to be made. Other comments, questions? Before I'll show you how good we did on. All right, so I'll show you the slides, and we can see how good we did in terms of capturing the key messages. All right, so as we tried to illustrate in our little skit, we tried to choose a title for the report that got at something that was more poetic than just an entire paragraph title, which is what we usually do. And so one thing that you may not know is that Albert Einstein, there's this beautiful statue of Albert Einstein in front of the National Academies building. It's this life-size statue, and it's a draw because you can come and you can sit on Einstein's lap and take pictures. And Einstein is, in some ways, I think of him kind of as like the patron saint of the National Academies. And Einstein himself was a real believer in the value of integrating the arts and humanities with sciences. And he's has famously made this statement that all religions, arts, and sciences are branches from the same tree. And so we built on this metaphor in the report to give the report the title, Branches from the Same Tree. I have to acknowledge that the sponsorship of this study, all National Academy studies are made possible by sponsorship from other organizations. This list of sponsors, the Mellon Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and actually the National Academy of Sciences itself kicked in some support for this. These are not, it's the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. How often do you think we get funding from the NEA to the NEA and Mellon Foundation? This is an unusual study, but I think it really speaks to this fascinating movement in higher ed that the National Academies felt like we really need to take this on.
Is there a way that, sorry, that you could use a mic?
Sure.
There's a handheld one over there.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Where's my hearing is going?
Happy to use the mic.
All right, is that better?
Yes.
Is it too much? No.
Okay. So I was just saying that this is an unusual set of sponsors for a National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine study. And I think it's important to, first of all, I want to acknowledge sponsors because we're eternally grateful to them for supporting the study. But secondly, I just want to point out that I think the reason that we did this study is because there's just a very real movement in higher ed towards this greater integration across the arts, humanities, sciences, engineering, medicine, that we found as we spoke to people was motivated by this notion that higher education has become too segregated along disciplinary lines, that we probably already know that higher ed is so siloed. And so there's this sentiment that we have to kind of address this and reintegrate knowledge that originally was much closer in terms of its in terms of students' understanding of how different human knowledges relate to one another. So the other thing we tried to highlight in our little skit is that the study was chaired by David Saylor, who is a member of the National Academy of Medicine. He was previous president of Cornell, current secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. Both in his professional life and his personal life, he really embodies what this report is about. Obviously, the Smithsonian is an institution that integrates the humanities and arts and science, engineering, and medicine. David is a cardiologist, and he's also a musician, so he's just was the perfect person to lead this study. And he's also just an incredibly wonderful, kind, funny person. I hope that you all have a chance to meet him sometime. The formal statement of task that we were charged with is that we were charged to look at the evidence behind the assertion that educational programs that mutually integrate learning experiences in the humanities and arts with science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine lead to improved educational and career outcomes for undergraduate and graduate students. So to undertake this work, we assembled a committee of experts and leaders in higher ed, people who are scientists, engineers, physicians, humanists, artists, and people who worked across those disciplines, doing integrative teaching and learning themselves. So it's really the committee that drove this process. You know, Maria and I are really spokespeople on behalf of the committee. They're the real experts. And they spent 2 years toiling away, looking at the research, the available evidence, thinking about the meaning of evidence. One of the interesting discussions that we had over and over again is what is the appropriate evidence to examine depending on your question? You know, when is it best to look at qualitative evidence, when quantitative evidence? How do you think about evaluating the impact of, for instance, an artistic performance? I always tell this personal story where I remember that one of the committee members, who's a violinist, she performed a piece during lunch at one of our committee meetings. It's a really fun group. And I remember coming away from this beautiful musical performance feeling like you could do a survey and ask people what the impact of that experience was on them, and that's a form of evidence, I guess, of that impact. But it really wouldn't fully capture the sort of evidentiary base of that. So how do we think about evidence? We're talking about art. You know, I don't think we can always take the same approach. So the committee, there's an entire chapter in the report, the committee's exploration of evidence and how we apply evidence to different questions, with some practical advice and also some very sort of, philosophical essays on that. So I encourage you to read that. Now, there are many findings and the committee's findings in the report. There are many recommendations targeted at various stakeholders. I just pulled out a few that were sort of the big ones. So this is one that we tried to illustrate in our skit that we just talked about a little bit, and that was just this idea that the kinds of outcomes we found associated with certain integrative approaches. I say certain because many of them are not evaluated. But the ones that we were able to examine include these sorts of outcomes like written and oral communication skills, teamwork skills, ethical decision-making, critical thinking, and the ability to apply knowledge in real-world settings. And these are many of the educational outcomes we find our employers are asking for today. Also, thinking about medicine, as I mentioned before, there are a lot of examples of integrative practices in medicine these days at a lot of different institutions. And some of the positive outcomes associated with the integration of the humanities and arts and medical training are things like increased empathy, resilience, teamwork, improved visual diagnostic skills, increased tolerance for ambiguity, and an increased interest in communication skills, so an understanding of the importance of communication skills. So the committee had sort of one big key recommendation, and that was that the committee urges the support and evaluation of these courses and programs. So there was sort of this question going into this study, is the committee going to recommend that higher ed continue to explore and adopt these kinds of practices? And the answer is yes, the committee does believe that this is worthwhile. And while more research is needed, the hope is that we can continue to explore these approaches and evaluate them as we do so. We see the committee saw general education as a place where we could target some of these approaches. It's interesting. Basically, every type of institution has a general education requirement. So the students are exposed to a broad of different knowledge in the context of these general education requirements. So this is sort of an opportunity to maybe rethink general education, perhaps to take a more integrative approach as opposed to the sort of, take the chemistry course over here and the philosophy course over there and the math course over there. But how can we bridge across these courses? And then, let's see. So this key recommendation, again, relates to general education, but thinking about how integration can occur in different levels of intensity, so interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary approaches, or sort of different levels of integrating across different subjects. And the hope is that if you integrate into a general education curriculum, that the hope would be that that would carry on throughout the specialized learning in the context of the major. I guess that's the end. Surprising. Anyway, before I wrap up, are there any final questions, comments? We'll be around today. So, yes, in the back.
So maybe I could ask you a question. Listen to your presentation. Everything was centered of, or at least the way that it came across, is everything centered on integrating arts and humanities into engineering and science. What I never heard you actually say is that you need to integrate engineering the opposite way around. And so if you go one side, not the other, and as an example, having spent time in Washington and dealt with many interns who are not engineers, but coming in and telling me, why would we ever support engineering?
Right.
And you ask them, where do you get your cell phone from?
Right.
And the answer is, it comes from a store.
Right.
And that's the level of knowledge people have. So I think when you think of how do you change the educational system to make it more sort of integrated, you also need to think, how do you actually get more from other parts of campus to understand the real aspects of science and engineering?
You're right. Thank you for bringing that up.
And that doesn't come across in your report at all.
You're right. So let me speak to that, actually. We emphasized the mutual. There's been much less research on the impact of integrating engineering, science, and medicine on the arts and humanities. But we can draw some broad conclusions. One is that there's value in integrating engineering, science, and medical ideas into pedagogies, into arts and humanities, because it's important to have that knowledge base. It's important to have sort of a literacy in those fields. Another is that science, engineering, and medical tools and technologies actually provide tools to support the arts and humanities. So like digital humanities is one example, how we can harness technology to gain new insights about our history using science and technology as a tool. And then the third is that what we learn through our pursuits of science, engineering, and medicine frames how we think about the human condition, and that influences our art and how we think about history. So those are sort of the three broad takeaways that we were able to make, but I will say we were limited in the fact that many of the courses that integrate engineering and science into arts and humanities, they haven't been evaluated. So it's a good point. And yeah, you want to respond?
So let me give you another example. Art and design student designed a beautiful new chair, very comfortable to sit in if you could ever sit in it and not break the chair. Right? Because the materials they had chosen to make the chair with could not withstand any load whatsoever.
Right.
Right, so now after they took a course in engineering, they actually understood what materials they should have used.
Right.
And so it could have actually helped in their design project.
Totally.
But if you take it one approach, and as you talk about changing general education requirements, it's more you should be thinking also along the lines of saying students from the social sciences, the arts, the humanities should be actually coming over, taking real science and real engineering courses. And yes, we in engineering and the sciences should develop them so that they're appropriate for their knowledge base. And maybe they're not math intensive or whatever the limitations are. And we can do that.
Right.
But I think your report, if it goes one way, which it seems to be, it's not going to gain much traction between the engineering and the science community.
Yeah, that's really helpful feedback. And actually, I should say probably the presentation skews more than the report. So,
But you're presenting this in multiple places.
Yeah, it's great feedback. We'll have to modify the presentation. Yes, in the back.
Just a couple of things at UW-Madison. The first year institute program, the PACE program, is designed specifically to integrate 3 courses together. And those courses are often coming from different places on campus. These 3 different domains are all integrated through just the structure of the course, which is simultaneously 3 courses. So that's one thing. Including engineering students, facility students, both working on design this semester. And in the Gen Ed committee, this idea of integration is, I think, the top priority moving forward. So there's some stuff happening on our campus directly related to content.
Great. Well, it'll be great to hear about how you overcome some of the barriers to communication. What are you doing, Richard? Yes, in the back.
Yeah. I think, an interdisciplinary approach is interesting. I come from a math background. I wasn't a good student, but I was a great mathematician and gradually picked up all the other things because in math or in engineering, you triangulate. If you get 3 different points, you can pick out a star or a point and everything. You need multiple points of view. And the same thing in the social sciences. You need political science and history and, in sociology and all these different approaches. Or as Einstein mentioned, he mentioned religions too. All these different religions, they may all come to the golden rule, but they come at it so many different ways that if you follow all those different approaches, you get a fuller view of what reality really is, and you don't get, and if you adopt all those different approaches and all those different ways of looking at things, then you don't get caught up in the details that are wrong or silo, narrow about any particular discipline. You can kind of see past that to the greater accuracy than when you look at it from multiple points of view.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, I'm wondering if you're going to be getting into some of the practical aspects of all this. People in the humanities get paid a lot less than people in the computer sciences and engineering and all of that. And the animosity there is visible. It's reified. It's whatever, it's there. And until some of those notions are worked out, how equitable is it for someone to be working alongside someone else? Again, take the partners, take the scenario, and find out that you're getting paid less. Now, I'm on the good side, the happy side of the equation, so I'm not complaining. But I do commiserate with people who feel that they're not being paid equitably for their work.
Right. Well, I certainly can answer that question, but I hope that you all will talk about it, because I think you're right, it's important. And if we're going to overcome any kind of barriers, we have to have real honest conversations about what they are. Other comments? Oh, yes.
I just wanted to say, I work for the Alliance for the Arts and Research Universities, and I'll talk about this more later, but we do tackle this idea of what counts as research and the equity issue. And the reason we're Alliance of 45 research universities is it's easier to step outside of one university to advocate and case make for this type of things we're discussing today. So I just wanted to let you know that that's why we're working with the National Academies to bring these questions out and also come up with the examples to integrate the arts and sciences, but also have the artists have exposure to the sciences and the engineering education that they need.
Yes.
I just wanted to add a perspective that I haven't heard yet, which is that I also think that universities, in order to continue to be relevant to, at least to helping people thrive in their careers and their lives, has to think about what I've heard called like a 60-year curriculum. So not just, I mean, we've been talking a lot about undergraduates or graduate students, people enrolled in sort of standard programs that we might offer, but I think we also have a chance, and maybe this is a place where we could start experimenting more and even finding more of this evidence, how the two-way integration could work in sort of more continuing education spaces, for example, because people are going to need to come back to universities. It's not going to, it is no longer enough to just get your 4-year degree and be on your way and never, come back for a football game and that's it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you raised that. We also do talk about this a little bit in the report, and I think it's chapter 1. I think it's chapter 2. But read the book. But yeah, you're right. And this notion of continuing education and the importance of lifelong learning comes up, and we do see that. There's actually one study we described in the report of an engineering course. It's an interesting example. They integrate history with engineering. They learn about alloys in the context of like Paul Revere, because Paul Revere was a silversmith. And then they did this evaluation of the student learning outcomes. And one of the outcomes was improvement in lifelong learning attitudes. So the students came out feeling like they were more excited about learning over the long term of their life. And so that was an interesting outcome. And you're right, if you look at like the Department of Labor statistics, people are, and this has been the case for a while, people are changing jobs every couple of years. People are spending less time in the same job for many, many years. So we do have to think about how people access education. Yeah.
I'm trying to find out how do you access this book, because you buy it is very expensive, but apparently there is a free download somewhere.
Thank you so much for asking that question.
No, we're talking about something.
The report is actually freely available online for download. All of our reports are freely available online for download. Oh yeah, maybe thanks, Mary. We'll write the email address, so you can also Google it. Yeah, it is expensive to buy the hard copy, but it's freely available for download. And I actually brought a couple copies, so maybe it's like a first come first served situation, but I'm happy to give them out. But yeah, you can. There you go. If you go to this website, you search for Interested in the Same Tree, you can download it for free.
Let's have it in a flyer on all the tables back.
And there's a flyer on the tables that gives us info and also some sort of high level overview of the report.
I also just sent out the download link to
Oh, perfect.
I just heard yesterday, so
Oh, perfect.
it'll be in your email. Yeah.
So we're almost out of time. Yes.
Yeah, on that note, I was just gonna quickly ask, some people find the PDF so large and unmanageable that they would rather read like a brochure or like a paper copy. Is there one like in a library here that we can go read or check out, or a way to get one like sent to us? Or we know everything's mostly digital now, but especially for people with access issues and whatnot.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I can send you a link to a summary that's easy to print out. It's just 4 pages. And if you ask me, I'll send you a copy of the book. At least for today. Yes.
You can also download by chapter?
Yes, you can download by chapter. And there's an executive summary in the beginning of the book that gives you a lot of the overview, and that's a little shorter, easier to print out. Yeah.
And you can read it online as well.
Right, and you can read it online. Any final thoughts or questions before we go to our next session? Just want to thank you all so much for being here. It's just so great to have this community as someone thinking about next steps. So I guess with that, I will end and turn it over. Thanks so much. We're going to get started. We have 2 presenters that are part of this first set of presentations, if you will. Clare Haden, who is a faculty
Associate with the School of Nursing, is going to go first. But I'm really thrilled because I actually know Claire in a completely different connection. She is part of the company at Forward Theater, of which I'm a board member. So I was thrilled to see that she was going to be a part of today's presentation. So without further ado, Clare Haden.
Thank you, Sherry.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Sherry. Yes, I love working for Forward Theater. So here, this is my first slide. No problem. There we go. That's me. Hi, again, I'm Clare Haden. I'm a faculty associate over in the School of Nursing, but I'm also a professional actor, voice and speech coach, and teaching artist here in town. I got my MFA here, actually in the theater and drama department in acting and voice and speech. And so now I get to use those skills in many, many different capacities. I go over and I work at Sohi with Dean Soyan Shim in the School of Human Ecology. I work with Sam Shakashiri in the chemistry department with the Science is Fun class. And now I get to work over at the School of Nursing doing what I do. I love what I do. As far as I'm concerned, I have the best job in the world. I get to tell stories. I get to get in front of people and I get to tell really effective stories, and I get to collaborate with really, really amazing, talented artists to bring everybody from many different disciplines in the same conversation, which is absolutely fantastic. And this is key for people in the medical world in order for patient safety and care. Because no matter what your job is, no matter what you do, we all can agree that effective communication is key to connection. And if we can make those connections, we're going to be better at our jobs in whatever capacity that is. And this is really, really true for nursing students. So nursing students, obviously, they have to make really, really fast, great first impressions with their patients, family members, a very, very fluid medical team that's coming in and out. And they have to do this effectively and even under really challenging situations. And they have to be able to step into those conversations, make a strong first impression, and keep that conversation moving forward. It's essential for patient safety and outcomes, and it's at the core of their professional practice. So, how do we teach this? A lot of nursing students, it's just inherent. It's an inherent quality. They're good listeners, they're very empathetic, they're able to lean in and have those conversations. But it's a skill that can be honed, and if it's not an inherent part of who you are, it's a skill that can be learned. And how do we do this? Improv! It's come up a couple times already here today. And most people hear that word and this is what you want to do. No, thank you. I'm going to go find something else to do. I'm going to go hide. Myself included. I'm a professional actor and somebody's like, let's play improv. I'm like, no, thank you. Because it's scary. I think we associate improv a lot of times with having to be clever and funny and witty, because that's what we see. We see whose line is it anyway, and all of these talented people on Saturday Night Live who came up through Second City in Chicago. And so we think that's what improv is all about, comedy sports. But actually, improv at its core is really about just being authentically present and being able to be spontaneous in the moment and stay in the conversation and make the other people that you're having the conversation with look good. So sometimes, yes, there is a crossover, but that is not the goal. When I come in and I do improv over at the School of Nursing or with Dr. Amy Zelenski with other scientists, the focus isn't about being clever or witty, it really is about just being present. So Viola Spolin was the mother of improv. She came up with these basic set of rules because she worked a lot with kids. And she noticed that children, once given a really basic set of rules for a game, were completely uninhibited and able to run around and play and be present with each other. And as adults, we tend to lose this skill. And so she came up with a bunch of rules for adults to play theater games to help adults be more authentically present. So I'm going to go through them really quickly. I pulled these from Tina Fey's book, Bossy Pants. If you haven't read it, it's fantastic. But the basic first rule of improv, the most important rule is to say yes. So if somebody throws out an idea, you say, yep, great, we're going to take that and we're going to run with it. But it's not enough to just say yes. You have to say yes and contribute something yourself to the conversation. This again keeps the conversation moving forward, especially when you're collaborating. It helps the energy in the room just keep building. So you say yes and you give gifts. You take the spotlight off of yourself actually, and it's all about really actively listening to the other people, contributing something of your own, making a clear statement, and making them look really, really good. How can I help my partner or the people I'm collaborating with shine? So again, it's taking the spotlight off of you actually. And with all of these rules in place, you can't really make a mistake. So you're free to take risks. You're free to just try different things because you know everyone's going to go along with you and build on those ideas. You have everything and you know everything, as we like to say.
So I teach these skills to the students and the faculty members over at School of Nursing with some reluctance at first, but then we get up and we play games and we have conversations, and it's amazing how quickly we're able to build and collaborate on ideas. I also use GoPro technology, and I hire other professional actors to come in and give real-time feedback to nursing students so that they are aware of how their body and their voice is directly affecting the people that they're talking to, patients, family members, another medical team when they're handing off information. Because a big part of communicating is yourself. And the more self-aware you can be about how your body and your voice is communicating those ideas, the clearer your communication is going to be. So Albert Moravian is a social psychologist. He wrote a book called Silent Messages, and you might have heard of his 7-38-55 rule, which is 7% of what you're communicating is the actual content, 38% is your tone of voice and quality of voice, and 55% is in your body language. And so we're really trying to hone, again, get those nurses very, very aware of what their bodies and their voices are doing when they make that strong first impression with their patients. I love collaborating. I get to work with Dr. Amy Zelenski. We co-taught a class called Improv for Scientists, which Amy is still teaching now. We taught it together for 3 years, and Amy's been teaching it on her own now. But we talk about things like what to do the moment before you walk into a high-stress situation. Getting present, feeling your feet on the floor, checking your posture, getting your breath underneath you, focusing on a core value of yours. We also talk about when you're communicating your science or what you do, getting to the why, the passion of what it is that you're doing first. Because again, that story connects us, it hooks us early. And if you can do that, then you can get into the detail and the minutia because you've got an active listener. And of course, we go back to the rules of improv. Say yes and. Any challenging conversation you have to go into, if you have that yes and in the back of your mind, you're going to be able to move that conversation forward even when it gets a little sticky. So again, I love doing what I do. I've got the best job in the world. My son gets to see me do it, get in a room of people and collaborate and make those connections. Because at the end of the day, it's all about communication, making connections. It's a two-way street. Even now I'm talking with you, but we're in a conversation together, yeah? So I thank you so much for your time, and I would like to turn it over now to my friend and colleague, Dr. Amy Zelenski.
Thank you, Claire.
You're welcome.
Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Amy Zelenski. I'm an assistant professor over in the Department of Medicine at the School of Medicine and Public Health. And I'm going to talk to you today about empathy and improv. These are not the first times you've heard these words this morning, so that is very helpful to me. I think we're going to have a lot of connections between what you've already heard. I have a passion for empathy. I have been fascinated by this concept ever since I started acting when I was about 12 years old. I realized later on in life that acting was fun and I loved it, but what I loved most about it was getting to know a character. Getting to know somebody else completely different from myself in such a way that I could honestly portray that person to an audience. And that is all about empathy. It's this connection between me and you, this space in between that's really, in my opinion, very magical. I want to just briefly talk about empathy on its own. We often use sympathy and compassion in concordance with empathy. Sympathy you can think of as when you see somebody who is having a hard time and you feel sorry for them and you want them to get over it. You want them to feel better. So sympathy is definitely not a bad thing, but it's more focused on your need to make sure that person feels better. Compassion is specifically geared toward trying to alleviate suffering. So when we feel compassion, we want to help people who are in a hard position, people who are their homes are burned by the fires in California. We have this desire to do whatever we can to help them. Empathy, however, stands on its own. And when I talk about empathy, I think about it in this way, that there are two components to it. First of all, there's this imaginative reconstruction of another's perspective. I can't pretend to know exactly how you're looking at a situation, but because I can imagine you in a situation, I can try and make that leap. When I do that, or maybe even before I do that, I'm going to resonate with some of your emotion around this, whatever your emotion is feeling. Now, I mentioned that compassion, sympathy is usually geared towards suffering. Empathy, you can feel empathy for joy, for awe, for confusion, for any emotion that we have as human beings. Mark Davis in the 80s realized that, like we said today, if you want to try and study something, you have to measure it. So he created 4 domains of empathy, and this is a measurement tool that people have been using since the 80s to measure empathy. It has those first 2 components I just talked about, this idea of perspective taking, empathic concern, is that feeling of warmth for another person. He was also interested in how much personal distress we take on from the other person. If you're anxious and afraid, how much do I take that on myself as well? And this idea of fantasy, how able are we to jump into even a fictitious situation and really feel the emotions of the characters? So quick poll, when you think about American society and this idea of perspective taking, do you think we're getting better at this? Worse at this, or staying the same? Yeah, you guys are right. So research would suggest that as a population, now these are American college students, so it's a subset of our population, but we have gotten worse at this over time. Same thing with empathic concern, a capability that dogs have shown in research, wanting to comfort human beings. Human beings are getting worse at this. And when I started to work in medicine, I saw this quite profoundly on an individual level. In medicine, we recruit people who are actually highly empathic, who want to use their knowledge, skills, and abilities to help people, as Claire was talking about with nursing students. But we do something to them throughout training that deteriorates this ability that they come in with. So I wanted to figure out how we could, maybe we can't see this rocket to the sky and have their abilities really improve, but can we at least level it off so that we don't see this trend in medicine? And I went back to somebody who you were just introduced to, Bayleigh Bolin. So when she was looking at how to enhance people's abilities to connect with one another, she used these improv techniques. And she found that it would enable people to be more present and really interact with people as they were, not our idea of who I would like you to be. You know these rules well by now. Agree, saying yes and, giving gifts. So I thought maybe if I got a group of health profession students together, nursing students, medical students, occupational therapy students, veterinary medicine students, if I got them together and we learned improv together, could I help them increase their ability to empathize, not only with their patients, but with each other? So I got a small grant from the National Endowment for the Arts to study this course. And I found it. Actually, it made an impact. So my improv group, you'll notice that it's not hugely different, but the trend, again, is to really go down steadily in these components of empathy. But my class gained in their ability to perspective take. They also gained a little bit in this idea of empathic concern as their own personal distress went down. When I compared these to a control group of their peers, you'll notice that their peers actually lost in their ability to engage in empathic concern, while they did see also a slight increase in perspective taking. This was just a 6-week class. We met 6 weeks, once a week for 2.5 hours. So the fact that I saw even these modest differences is really encouraging. Not only did they show differences in empathy, but they were more able to show care and compassion for their team members, to encourage their team members to voice their own perspective on patient care, and to voice their perspective on patient care based on their own profession. Thank you. On a personal note, they found that these skills and these empathy and improv skills actually helped them reconcile with family members, have different conversations with their spouses. And when I started to think about why, what is actually the mechanism of action here, I think part of it is this idea of yes and. This idea that for a moment, I'm going to suspend my own judgment, my own opinion, and I'm going to listen to you and validate what you have to say before I then incorporate my own point of view. So that's something I think that we could all learn to do better. Thank you.
My name is Meredith Beck-Mink, and I'm the program coordinator for the Constellations program, which I'll tell you about shortly here. I've never done one of these style of presentations, so when Kate invited me, I was looking up some suggestions, One of the tips is to grab onto a big story, right? And I think that one of the stories that we'd be inclined to tell right now from the humanities and arts perspective is one of decline that might be symbolized by this big red arrow going downwards. That is history majors over the last decade at UW-Madison. And if you want to know too, that blue line is actually biology majors. However, I also wanted to pay attention to what I think is represented by this image more, which is a story of integration. There are more students taking double majors, doing double majors, taking certificates right now on campus than any time previously. And I think from the administrative perspective and from a student perspective, there's a real desire for integration. And as a historian of science, I wanted to zoom out for a moment and note that this story of integration is actually not a new one, but this is Science Hall in 1880. And it incorporated both an art gallery and a museum. And disciplinary boundary making and codification is really a 20th century phenomenon. So I think we're moving out of that into the 21st century, seeing more integration, and we have to address that from a curriculum standpoint. So one of the ways that we're trying to do that is with the Constellations program on campus. Unfortunately, that lower image doesn't look very good, but hopefully it will on the next slide. The Constellations program is a new initiative in humanities that's really geared at helping students make connections across courses, across fields, and through asking big picture questions. I'll move to this, that looks better. Okay, so again, in creating this program, the idea was not to reinvent the wheel, but help students see connections across different disciplines. For spring 2019, we are offering 4 course constellations, which I'll describe in a second. One on animal studies, one on bodies and society, one on the planetary, and one on health and inequality. And just to be clear, what a constellation is we're modeled to a degree off of the FIGS program, which Nathan Phelps mentioned earlier. And a constellation is a cluster of 3 classes that is grounded, in this case, in the humanities class. So for the animal studies constellation, it's grounded in a literature and animal studies constellation connected with biology 152 and a pathobiological sciences class. For next spring, we're offering a number of classes, which I won't go into detail, or constellations, course clusters. One on the planetary that's grounded in comparative literature, one on health and inequality that's grounded in communication arts, and one on bodies and society that's grounded in a classics course. And again, what you can see here, the theme is that we're pairing these humanities classes with social science classes and science classes. Another element of our program is that we offer pathways into different established certificate programs. So again, we're not reinventing the wheel here, we're guiding students to opportunities that are available on campus, like the new Health and Humanities certificate. Another element of our program is we're offering co-curricular activities like field trips and mentorship. We have 4 rotating professorships that are part of our program. This is one of our professors, Mario Ortiz-Robles, who works in the English department, and he heads the Animal Studies constellation. And if you happen to have students that are interested or this sounds cool, I did want to direct you to our website that has all of this information available. And students can enroll right now through the enrollment page. And I wanted to just end by saying, I think, here's my contact information. All of our information is available on the website. But again, I think Constellations is one of a number of different programs at UW that's trying to address this need of integration. And the way that we're doing it is by offering students opportunities to take 3 courses together in one semester and do it in a way that allows them to make connections across fields. Thanks.
there has been thoughts in the past few decades that there are really two main modes of communication. One is exposition, which is favored by scientists. It's very precise. That's how they talk about their concepts and data and math. And then the other one is narrative, which is story. And when you put the two together, when you compare them, story wins every single time, hands down. Story is more engaging. And it also results in more understanding. And so Bayleigh and I and our colleagues here at the UW have asked the question, can we use story to help scientists be better and more effective communicators? And in the next 4 minutes, we will tell you our investigations and answers, 5 different projects. Go. Fusion Science Theater is a project that was started at Madison College and then moved to the UW-Madison. The idea was to have, it's a cross-disciplinary program. It involves theater artists, it involves scientists and educators. We write shows that communicate and teach science concepts to kids in the public, and using principles and elements of story, and it works. We were funded by the National Science Foundation, and these shows are now being done across the country in museums and in universities. Number 2. Wisconsin Story Works is a project out of the Division of Continuing Studies here at the UW. We teach scientists how to use story and principles of story to be more effective communicators. And in our workshops, which are here at the UW and across the state, we actually have scientists come up, create their own presentation. Number 3. Illuminating Discovery, a course that's taught here at the Discovery Building. It teaches postdocs and graduate students at the UW how to use story, how to use visuals and interactives to be better communicators. Everything is product driven, so the students use these skills and they make posters, they make presentations, they make job talks for the public and for their peers. And last year, this group, 2/3 of them said that this course was transformative when it came to their own communication practices. Number 4.
Thank you, Holly. So number 4 is JKX Comics, and this group was actually born here at UW-Madison. And so who we are is we're a group of grad students and postdocs who really wanted to have a goal of increasing scientific literacy through the use of comics, which is a really fun and engaging medium. And so through this, we're able to talk about scientific projects that are occurring on campus and specific research being done here through our various comics, such as our scientist spotlights, our one-page science shorts, as well as our full-length comics. And each of these are free and downloadable via our website at jkxcomics.com. And so where Holly and JKX Comics come together is part 5, which is gaining STEAM, illuminating research through art, where we want to add a art component into STEM. And this project, again, is going to help break down these barriers between researchers on campus and the community to help facilitate communication. And this project could not have been done without funding through the UW Arts and Business competition that really helped facilitate this collaboration with this project. And so, how are we gaining STEAM? So what we're doing is we've selected 8 different scientists across campus from multiple disciplines, such as psychology to astrobiology, and at multiple career stages as well. And what we've done is we've paired these scientists up with a local UW-Madison artist, as well as our JKX comic artists, to work together to make a comic book about that scientist-specific research project here on campus. And so with the help of Holly, we put together a 2-day workshop where we teach the principles of storytelling, as well as how to implement comics in real life. And together, what this ends up forming is where scientists and artists are working together, again, to apply these principles of how to make a comic into a full-length comic about their specific research. So at the end of this inaugural project of the STEAM, what we'll have accomplished is we'll take scientists and their research, which is often very confusing, right? We'll have taught these scientists principles of storytelling and communication so that they can speak to the public about their research. And then adding in local artists, as well as our JKX Comics crew, we can take their confusing science, put it into an illustration format, and what this will ultimately make is a compilation of a comic book anthology of these scientists' research in a format that's aimed really at middle school students. And then we'll be having these comics as well as posters and the scientists available to talk to our public at an exhibition next year. And so together, through Holly's work at Science Fusion Theater, Illuminating Discovery, and Wisconsin Storyworks, and then our group at JKX Comics, and again, funding that allows us to all be possible, what we can do is we can use STEAM and add an art component into STEM, break down these barriers, and help facilitate communication at all ages. And thank you.
So I think Bayleigh brings up a great point that I don't want us to walk past, and that's the importance of funding. If you look through the report, you will see that there were a number of funders that were involved, not just the ones that Ashley pointed out at the beginning, but funders who came to the think tank because they were interested in how they could help fund this work. So everyone from the National Endowments of Arts and Humanities, the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, etc. A lot of federal agencies, and then also local organizations. The Arts Business Competition is a shared venture between the Division of the Arts and the Gold Center for Arts Administration through the School of Business. So there are those resources out there. The second thing I just wanted to point out before we move into our small working groups is that just the number of people in the room and the number of disciplines that are represented. You've heard from our presenters up here and who they represent, but I'm looking around the room and I'm seeing the Chazen Museum of Art, and I'm seeing pharmacy, and I'm seeing a division of, the design studies, and loads and loads of folks that I don't know. So the purpose behind this next set of working sessions is, again, for you to choose a table, continue a conversation, and add some of your own work and your own ideas to what's already happening.
So I teach anatomy to a lot of people, but one of the classes I teach is to the students in their 4th year, so they're about to go into the world and treat patients. This is what you guys, and part of their project is to explain something at the level of a middle schooler, as if they're explaining it to a patient. And they have such a hard time, really resistant, and then they don't do a very good job. So I'm here to see if anyone can help me with that.
I don't know, they're probably maybe not parents yet, but some may be parents, but most of us have siblings or cousins. You know, to imagine trying to tell your little brother or sister what is going on with their body.
And so you just make a lot of assumptions that, of course, we all know this information, so I can use certain jargon that we're all on the same page. Yeah, and Amy and I have there's a specific fun game that we use actually for just this thing called Time Traveler. Should we talk about it a little bit? Time Traveler, just basically in a nutshell, is time travel and assign your audience. You partner up, and one person is from now, and somebody else has time traveled. So, like, you say, okay, you're going to be from now, and you're going to be from a cave woman, who's like a medicine woman who's very, very smart, high up in your tribe, but you are going to be zapped to the future, and you've got a broken arm, and you have to try and convince this person to get them to a doctor to get an X-ray, and they have no idea what you're talking about, and so you have to figure out in just 2 minutes how to very quickly convince them and explain to them what an X-ray is, what it does, and convince them to come with you to a doctor. And so it forces you to, again, have to use language and find commonality with this person that doesn't have any of the information that you have. And you can set up any different scenario you want. We've done, people from the 1600s and you have to explain to them what a cell phone is, and you know what I mean? And whatever it is, something that we all have common knowledge about, and figure out a way to talk about it in a way that's very, very basic. But explain, the one that you talked about as well is a really, really good one.
I'm curious, you said that they're very resistant. Do you have an idea of where that resistance comes from?
I think it's because two things. It's uncomfortable for them to revert to that language because they're so, like you said, their empathy goes down, and yes, it does from first to fourth year because they're so drilled to talk a language when they're in the clinic, and sort of step back and have to use like human language is what I call it. No jargon. Don't give me the names of the bones that you know from anatomy. Talk about parts people know. And I think it's that pressure that they've felt for the past 4 years, and then it's really hard. It's really hard.
So I think one thing that I do with my classes is to say that this is the skill that you've used and that you've learned really well. Now you need to learn this other skill of translating it into this other, back to, and we have this other exercise where it's called half-life, where you try to explain something with decreasing amounts of time. And one thing that people understand or get from that exercise is that when you are speaking with a colleague, yes, you need to use that jargon. It is nice to communicate big concepts really quickly. However, when you're talking with your grandmother or with somebody who has an 8th grade level education, you also need to be able to change your language. And we do this in groups of 2 or 3 so that they can give each other feedback, so that no teacher is kind of listening to them, but they can assign their audience. So I can say, I would like you to be somebody, I'd like you to be my uncle who I'm going to have a conversation with at Thanksgiving who doesn't know anything about medicine. And then the partner really tries to take on that perspective and give them feedback. When you said femur, I don't know what that is, but you could have said the bone in your leg or whatever. And it's really interesting to hear them give each other that feedback as opposed to somebody else.
Exactly. And that's, I think, a stumbling block because they're only trying to think about it from their side.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
From an adult learning perspective too, and I don't know if there's an improv game that speaks to this, but the first concern is always, what's in it for me, right? So telling them, well, these days patients, I have one in my bag from my doc. We get surveys about our providers. You're only as good as you are able to communicate.
You'll find out later.
Yeah. So what's in it for, is there an improv game that's about what's in it for me?
Yeah, it sort of comes out when you're playing the games, because we always, after we play a game, we do a debrief and talk about, okay, how will this help you in your jobs? And sometimes it comes out of things like that.
So it's also important to make sure that people aren't choosing their pairs. Because if they're choosing, they're going to choose someone that they already know, and that almost makes it even harder because they're trying to maintain a standard with that person as well that they've already established.
Competitive questions.
Yeah. So improvisation is very beneficial for us to build other people up and then smooth the communication. But for international, for people with international background like me and many of the international students, they are struggle with the language. And then it's very hard for them to think about the language as well as think about team building using some of the techniques. Do you have any curriculum for training necessary for instructors or faculties with international background, where the English is not a primary language.
Yeah, well, I have nothing specific, but in almost every, at least with the 3 years that we did it, we always had people where English was their second language to participate in our Improv for Scientists class. And it was a struggle with certain games that were very language-based for them to keep up. But what was great about it is exactly what we're talking about now, is people very quickly had to figure out, okay, what is our commonality? What do you know and I know? What do we both know together? And then they were able to build games that way, and again have to do exactly what you said, which is find out, well, what do we both know, and how can I make you look good and make sure that I'm not leaving you behind because of the language that I'm using. Yeah, but I'm trying to think of anything specific. The gibberish game was really, really good for that because we didn't actually have to use language. We just used gibberish sounds. Yeah. And so it was all about body language communicating stories. Somebody would act something out, and then you had an interpreter who was like, this is what I'm saying, and then the other person had to act it, and building upon that. So language wasn't a barrier there for that one.
It's something I've been thinking about a lot, though, and how to make this environment safe for people, because you have to do this extra level of processing that a native speaker doesn't have to do. So one thing I've encouraged, or when students have talked to me individually about it, I actually encourage them to just say whatever word comes to their mind, even if it's in their native language, because then you introduce something into the scene and your partner is there to pick it up.
There's a relation to.
Yeah, and whatever this means to them, it's going to take on a different meaning than it probably actually means. But it's a way to work on that ability to really think on your feet quickly without having that extra layer of processing. But it's a challenge as a teacher of this that I'm still struggling with, how to make that more accessible.
Yeah, one of the things that both of your kind of questions, going back to the data, to the extent that those data are accurate, 5% of what is said is what's relevant, and so if it's indeed how it's said in the body language, then language shouldn't necessarily be the main impediment, and the ability to articulate well to an 8th grader isn't really as important perhaps as some of these other things. So just kind of using that as a starting point to think about, well, maybe it's not so much about what we say as all these other factors, which maybe they could be more. And I think anytime you want to do this, sort of scaffolding it so that they can see that I'm not very good at this, and that there is a real world application, and then you're going to teach me some things that can make me better at it. And that that instead of just here it is.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, thank you. I need to remember that all the time. Only 5%.
Yeah. It's it's kind of reassuring to say it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Although I hear that it's critical in your case. I mean, what we say, that 5%, like a lot of people aren't going to ask. I don't know what that means because we're afraid of looking stupid, right?
That's right. Yeah, the jargon's the big hurdle. Yeah.
Suppose that you have a research paper for a student on the Spanish Civil War. It took place somewhere else, a long time ago before I was born. What's it got to do with me? And you relate that to the concepts of how that affected the Spain we know today in terms of its development. Again, those are a lot of iffy, concept-y types of things. But if you can help them make that leap, sometimes you have to do it in steps, they will better understand the whole picture of, a lot of Spain's problems today went back to the Spanish Civil War because they were never fixed and they festered on and whatever.
And Amy and I know we talk about that a lot in the Improv for Scientists class of getting to the why should I care really early, because if you give all of this information first and they're not listening or they're not invested, then what's the point? So again, it's why should I care about the Spanish Civil War? What does it have to do with? And then if you can get at that early and hook them, then you can get into the details.
How many sessions?
So where do you think that improv might be helpful? Based on your presentation, I wondered if improv might be useful for our executive team.
Yeah. And there's a lot improv's been used a lot in business for communication, for innovation. Even simple games like yes and. There's a way that you can pair up and do a yes and, yes but, no
conversation.
Actually, the line that really got me was making your partner look good. We need that.
and it's amazing when you see, and for some students I've seen that's the first thing, that's the hardest thing for them to do, is just to say yes, because they have this really good idea that they want to see to come to life.
Right. To let go of that.
Yeah, to let go of that can be really hard. But after maybe the second, third week, you really see that chip away. So I would say that, it takes a little bit of time. But that's when improv is kind of nice, because you force it so that you do understand, oh, I'm not good at this, or oh, my tendency is to say yes, but why is that? And I think so much of what our students take away, we never know, because it's just these little things that happen in their own brains, like, oh, I really didn't like being the follower, I liked being the leader. What does that mean? So I think that you can incorporate even like small activities into meetings, like, first 5 minutes of a meeting or something, and really get people to work together in this way. And then it helps them to think about, how can I be more of a contributor instead of maybe I just want my idea to be heard and that's it.
Is there some service group or some entity on campus that could help us with this, or is there a curriculum that we could do ourselves, or?
It's the leadership improv. It happens once a month on Fridays, and anybody's welcome. That's where I met Dan.
It's called Leadership Improv?
It's in the UW calendar.
It's sponsored
I saw it
through
the other
Do
day.
It.
Oh.
It's not a
And it's
community practice.
It was last Friday, so whatever last Friday was.
Second Friday?
Second Friday of the month at Union South in some room.
And escape room games have become so popular for the private sector to use as a team-building exercise for new senior staffs coming together and things like that. There's and a lot of times getting out of your discipline actually helps you understand each other's strengths better, so that when you come back into talking specifically about your discipline, you actually respect each other more.
I like the ground rules. I mean, those are really a great starting point for any dynamic between human beings. So that to me is really appealing. I know I work with a lot of different faculty in different settings, and one common denominator is the amount of really fragile kind of psychologies that are being brought in by students, and how quickly it's breaking down the dynamics of the class. And really senior people who've been doing this, who actually teach around issues of diversity, are struggling with diversity in the classroom right now in a way they never have in their whole career. And I'm hearing lots of this. And what happens is quickly somebody says something that the whole thing spirals out of control, and then factions are formed, and there's this sort of bitterness within and it happens without their knowledge of how it happened even. Just like, now my class is all divided, so, it's a real issue that a lot of people are grappling with, and this is the kind of thing that can provide some ground rules, some facilitated interactions that will maybe mend or prevent, ideally, some of those dynamics. So I'm pretty excited about thinking more about it.
I think it's just, great pedagogy to think about having this as just a common set of rules that we're going to, at least for a moment, say yes, just like in your mind.
Right.
Even if it's a brief moment, just saying yes at the beginning can really help.
Yeah, and I've noticed too with the nursing students, so I've brought some of this work in, and we've put them, I've hired other professional actors, and we've put them in clinical simulations with a professiontional actor as opposed to a dummy or another one of their peers. And we've thrown curveballs at them and made the situation a little more stressful than it needs to be by throwing curveballs at them, and how they react in the moment to that. And we're able to give them, again, real-time feedback on, like, as soon as you started crossing your arms, as soon as I started getting defensive, and I could see it, yeah, exactly, and that's how it made me react, by like, oh, you're getting defensive. And so, again, a lot of these concepts and these rules force you to kind of stay in the conversation and to actually lean in and listen when those things happen, which keeps it moving forward and can help it from spiraling out of control. But it was great to see them recover in ways of like, oh no, I need to I need to be aware of what my body language is doing in this situation, and so I'm going to uncross my arms and I'm going to stay present. I'm going to look them in the eyes and lean in and listen, and then all of a sudden, instead of being derailed, they were able to stay in it and actually navigate through it in a way which is critical for what medical students and nursing students have to do. So. Yeah, so it can be really helpful. But it does
Also,
take
I just
practice.
think in traumatic interventions too, that need to think on feet is, but also with empathy. Right?
Yes.
Not Roboton, but
Exactly.
Yeah. Attending on two levels to the person in front of you.
In fact, that's one of the parts of trauma-informed care, if you've ever heard of that. The idea is that you sort of bridge that where they are now and where they need to go.
So I deal with a lot of undergraduate students, and they are new to campus, and they are struggling with understanding why you want to be a critical thinker and how like and maybe even improv and why these activities are really important. So what would you recommend for us to do with our students so that they can get that concept across?
I think one of the sort of very personal benefits that I've seen a lot of students gain from improv in particular is confidence. So you are going to need to go out and go interview for graduate school or interview for a job or whatever it is, and using these improv skills can really help you present yourself the way you want to so that you're not stumbling over words. I would think that's probably the biggest personal gain that I see people get from it.
There's a game in improv where, and I forget what it's called because I'm terrible with names, but it's the game where somebody's doing something and you have to take on the action, or somebody calls out something but you have to do a different action. You actually split. Or what are you doing, game? What are you doing?
I'm petting my dog.
A couple thousand each, absolutely.
What are you doing?
I'm brushing my teeth. Sort of, once you get
What are you doing?
It's an exciting experience.
Mowing the lawn.
It's a meaningful mental experience for them.
The top of the lawn.
What are you doing?
I'm rocking a hula hooping competition. Yeah. What are you doing? So you're constantly, so you end up having to do what the person says, but then take on a completely different action yourself. And it splits the brain, gets you out of that.
Which actually helps you think about why you think what you think, right? I mean, it has the opposite effect. Anyway.
It's really interesting. It's called a divergent thinking game. How do you split that up?
But then to your point, then you have to follow up that conversation with the students, so they don't think they're just playing a game.
Exactly.
How does this divergent thinking actually help me?
The basis of all learning is perceived need to know. You know?
Yeah.
That's a great. And I've done this with voluntary groups and involuntary. And the voluntary groups are much more fun. The involuntary groups, you do have to kind of slowly get them into it. Yeah. Play games that aren't too risky. But they come around. I did a workshop for the whole Department of Medicine, so we ran 450 cardiologists, oncologists, you name it, through. And we did some improv activities and a lot of participatory theater, really. And they all at the end said, this was a lot better than I thought it would be. So, maybe 5% didn't say that, but for the most part, once you actually get them into it, a lot of people just kind of let go of their ego a little bit.
So I'm curious what it is that you guys are measuring to show the change in the impact of the work that you're doing. And I mean, because I imagine you're having to use that to continue to make the case to continue doing this kind of work.
So I use empathy measures. So I use the Interpersonal Reactivity Index, which is the Davis tool that I talked about a little bit. And then there's also the CARE measure, which is empathy from a receiver point of view. And when we did the study in the Department of Medicine, we looked at a comparison group of surveys, patient satisfaction surveys, to say, a lot of things happened in the UW health system, but one thing that was different from the Department of Medicine to the Department of Pediatrics was we did this workshop. And we did find that in the Department of Medicine, that measure of did your provider show care and compassion compassion for you was a lot higher, was statistically higher in pediatrics.
And
so those are the types of, because I'm most interested in empathy and I kind of use theater to teach that, those are the measures that I've been using.
that you can make,
But
it's not just
I think other people have used different, just depending on what they want to look at.
with exemplary
What else you are using in nursing?
We're not yet, other than
all right, well,
so far we just have personal surveys and student feedback from like, did you notice a difference? So we do things where I'm trying to do exactly what with the Albert Moravian thing of getting people much more aware of what their body and how their voice is communicating, thinking about that. And so I've been trying to measure things like concrete things like eye contact, gesture, vocal fry, things that. And then vocal fry. Vocal fry.
Sounds
so
dangerous.
that's when you lower in both energy and pitch while you're talking, so that it kind of comes back on yourself a little bit. You hear that? Yeah, Kim Kardashian talk.
What does that tell us?
What is that?
Frying.
What's the message?
Vocal fry. Well, what it communicates is it is bringing what you're trying to say back on yourself. So it's not necessarily communicating your message directly to the person. You're kind of coming back on yourself, and then it makes it hard to hear. It makes it hard to understand, and it's also forcing the listener to have to fill in the gaps and do a lot of the work for you. So it's the same thing that happens with people up talking. So like, my name is Claire. I'm going to be your doctor today. It's like, really? Are you? Is that your name? So yeah, it's taking back, it's losing impact of the statements that you're making in clear communication. It's muddying the waters. So I'm trying to teach some of these concepts and making nursing students aware of the fact, like, do you realize when you walk into the room, it took you a good minute and a half to actually make eye contact with the patient? Or did you notice when you came in, you turned your back to them right away, or your proximus was not great? And just trying to get concrete methods for some of these concepts, so that after we do some improv and we do some work on it and we go back and do the simulation again, there's a measurable difference. So we had another nursing student, lovely student, very, very warm. But I was the patient in the bed, and she came in, and again, she didn't, if I was laying there, she didn't get any closer than this to me while we were talking, as opposed to having another new student come in and get down on my level and like talk to me right here, which makes a really big difference in how the patient feels like they are receiving care. So we talk about concepts like that, but so far the qualitative study has just been the nurses' individual feedback with how they feel they've improved in some of those areas.
I graduated from College of Engineering here. So before I took the business communication course, I had no idea the cultural difference impact, the gender difference impact to the communications. And after I took the business communication course in the school of business, it was eye-opening. So I feel like business school need to provide more business communication course to students of all disciplines. And secondly, the business communication teaches people to for clear speaking, clear writing, but the improv make it one more step. It teaches students to be present, and then to build each other up. And because you build each other up, and then you have a better relationship, it's critical to future collaborative projects, whoever is doing in the future, and it's critical to their future success. So I feel like business courses need to be more, we need to have more courses like that, and then those courses need to have improv as one of the modules.
We were talking about just big picture, how you get buy-in to set up these kinds of programs, especially when they're brand new or when they're old and enrollment is dropping off. So just looking at different models for funding, faculty incentives, what are barriers, things like oftentimes with interdisciplinary stuff, we'll just offer it once, like, oh, this is so awesome, but then it never happens again, and you never get that word of mouth, which is where enrollment comes from. We also talked about just the issue of lack of understanding between arts and
arts, humanities, and STEM, or as I put it, mutual disdain. We talked about some ideas looking at diverse doctoral committees. So how can we get things integrated at a more fundamental level where people are getting exposed to different disciplines when they're working on their dissertations or when they're mentoring other people. We also, the idea came up of looking at the students who are taking these classes in Constellation specifically, but that would apply to undergraduate research scholars and other FAICs, other high impact practices. And where are they coming from? What happens to them afterwards? And could we do this through cartoons? So, anything else I forgot, you guys?
That's great. Thank you. Great. Thanks, guys. Who wants to go next? Mary Rose, one at your table who wants to? Ellie, come on.
Hi. Okay, so we talked about the
Illuminating, discovery, etc. programs, integrating art with science, yes. So we talked about some of the stuff already happening on campus that's doing this, including at the Holt Center. They have an undergraduate certificate, also PhD minor. And I think a lot of our discussion was about institutional challenges to these approaches and how much of it has to be student-driven. Or sort of staff-driven, and thinking about how few faculty are involved in these conversations or deans. So one thing we noted is that often these things happen by students working across networks of other students to get involvement. Typically, they require external funding, at least here at somewhere like the University of Wisconsin. So not a lot of institutional support for these sort of experiments. And also how much departments' course requirements and prerequisites to take courses in other departments hinder students from reaching across boundaries. And then, finally, again, just thinking about where the faculty and deans are in these conversations who can actually have some kind of input where it's not just getting pushed to gen ed requirements every time for this kind of stuff to happen. So,
anybody else at the table?
And I should have done this after the first table. Questions for each of these two tables that have been brought up for you as you hear what their comments and their outcomes are. I actually have one, and that is, are any of the groups that are in the room involved with cluster hires or have put together some sort of faculty cluster, the interdisciplinary artist residency program? Over here, we had someone.
The Holt Center for Science.
The Holt Center, okay. And
I'm going to one in about an hour.
Tell us a little bit about it if you would.
Okay, sure. Sorry. It is the cluster hire for reproductive health, and there's a teaching example in about an hour in Sterling Health.
So what disciplines are involved with
Oh, I'm sorry. The disciplines involved are sociology, gender, and women's studies.
Great.
Thanks. And Holt Center, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about your model.
Sure, we actually, the Holt Center has no tenure lines of its own, but around the same time that the bequest that started the Holt Center was happening, the last round of cluster hires was going on, so in the early 2000s. And at the time, 3 cluster hires were made for folks who were then supporting the mission of the Holt Center, but who then had really one foot in their own disciplinary home. So 2 of those folks are still on campus, still permanent members of our steering committee, still contributing to teaching Holt Center courses. And we're actually preparing a new proposal for the 4th round of cluster hires around science, technology, and democracy.
And what are the disciplines that your faculty come from that are part of that cluster?
The current faculty who have been around for a while now, one is in medical history and bioethics and history of science, and one is in sociology.
Great, thank you.
Just wondering, again, and you said something that was critical to me, and that is
the whole center itself has no tenured faculty. It's about how you are able to sort of instigate, if you will, or navigate these disciplines coming together to do the work,
right.
both for their own departments, but as well for the institute.
It's a constant challenge.
Okay, not without its difficulties. How about table one? Claire, Amy?
Go for it, Erin.
Hello, everybody. So, improv is an oral tradition. But we had a great conversation about people sort of bringing their teaching challenges to bear and figuring out how improv might be able to help. Unfortunately, there's not a workbook or a guidebook, but we talked about different ways that you could use it to teach medical students how to talk about anatomy to people who don't necessarily use the words that they're going to use and that they spend 4 years learning how to use. We also talked about that there's a leadership improv group on campus.
Through Do It, December 14th, Union South.
Through Do It, December 14th at Union South, they're having a session and it's all comers. So if you're interested in playing some improv games and see how this might affect your teaching. 12 o'clock, 12 to 1:15, yes. We talked about the challenges of using these techniques with people who aren't native English speakers, and I know as a teacher I'm still working on ways to make sure that everybody has access to this, because we also talked about how powerful it can be to use these techniques and these skills not only to empathize and communicate with others, but also to gain some agency of your own and some confidence in the knowledge that you are building as a student. What else am I missing?
Questions from the larger group? I don't see her here right now, but Kirsten Pires was here from the Chase Museum of Art, and you may, is she still here?
She was part of
Oh, okay, she's part of your group. So she may have talked about Dr. Mariah Quinn, who brings her residents over to the Chase Museum of Art specifically to think about questions of empathy and how to help them think about empathy as they're working with patients. So I think, again, lots of examples both on the performing arts and the visual arts sides of things, and if we can start to think about how those resources are available to all of us, that it's not just an example that we can point to, but that anybody could access the Chase and to be able to do that anybody could perhaps reach out to Claire and Amy to say, this is something that we want to try to do over here, how can we make this happen? I think it's really important. So I think, any other comments or questions before we wrap up? Well, thank you again all for taking the time today. I think what you can expect from this group and from the Division of the Arts as outcomes to this meeting is that I heard Kate say that there'll be a follow-up email where we'll send out the notes from the meeting as well as materials from the National Academies of Sciences. We'll also send Ashley's PowerPoint out because there were some people that wanted to be able to reference that in the future. We'll check with the presenters, other presenters, if they're willing to share their presentations, we'll do that as well. But I think we started a conversation. We'd like to keep this conversation going. I think this is a group that might want to continue to meet, might want to continue to bring more people into the fold, so to speak, so that we can continue to build some ideas and momentum and consensus on campus. So I'd like to thank our guests from the National Academies. Yes. From the National Academies, Ashley and Maria, thank you so much for joining us today. And again, thank you to the Division of the Arts and to Mortgage Institute for hosting and sponsoring us today. I want to leave us with the Alliance for Arts and Research Universities, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about what they do and how you are a member of A2RU because you are a member of the UW-Madison campus. Mary Rose Flanagan.
Thank you so much, Sherry and Kate and John and everyone for hosting us here. Like Sherry said, you are all members of this alliance, the Alliance for the Arts and Research Universities. I hope you do think about who's not at the table today and continue to meet. One point of these town halls was to get everyone in the same room, and you can continue to advocate for what you showed up today to talk about. I want to thank Maria and Ashley from the National Academies. This report is so important to our work to give us something to point to for administrators and policymakers, and to surface what we already know and how good interdisciplinary education is for all students. Also, University of Wisconsin, we were all hosting an A2RU conference in 2020, and so we will continue the conversation, and we'll see you all then too. Meanwhile, next year we'll be at the University of Kansas. Finally, I wanted to talk about our research agenda, and I wanted to invite you all to participate in a survey we're doing with all these town hall meetings. And it is a series of questions which will continue our work, which was, we were funded by the Mellon Foundation, did 900 interviews about perspectives of arts integration and interdisciplinary work on campuses. And we scrubbed that data, we scrubbed the interviews, we came up with data from it. We have these research briefs you see on the tables. Please take them. Please visit our website with the information. Use it when you're talking about this. Use the NASEM report as well. And we're going to send you all a link to the survey, and I really encourage you to help us with our research, to map these conversations and build a knowledge base to service all of your good work, and to acknowledge additional ways of knowing at the Modern Research University. One of the first briefs is what is research. We're kind of re-asking, re-interrogating what counts as research at the Modern University, to bring artists and humanities to the table and have every student be able to have a more well-rounded education and to pursue whatever makes them curious. So again, you're going to get that link. Please share it, and please do take the survey. And thank you so much for hosting us today.